evening. My name is Vincent, and I'm here at the Live at 5 to discuss the president expanding the war in Syria, and say how this the war is overhyped, and it's not in fact for the U.S. people's best interest or the people of the Middle East. But here, as many of you may have known, that just last week the president announced how he was going to try and pass through Congress a limited war against the Islamic State in Syria, ISIS, to even put limited ground action, as well as the undeclared airstrikes, and notes here. And how all of this is rather counterproductive to the war goals of stopping ISIS, because a lot of the things that the State Department and CIA are doing is in fact supporting ISIS through the funding of Saudi Arabia, which has been recently declassified, but they did also help fund the some of the 9/11 hijackers on September 11th, and also, there's many videos and other evidence of airdrops of weapons, intended for the Free Syria Army, which is, as people like to say, the good Syrian rebels. In fact, always end up into the hands of ISIS. And pretty much as going along on that point, the Free Syria Army is as they first started out were the group of Syrian rebels that were similar to the rebels fighting against Gaddafi, were a group of rebels from Syria, which were sprung out of the Arab Spring movement, whose goal was to overthrow Bashar al-Assad's oppressive regime in Syria, and like the whole Libyan rebels, and even in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, they were encouraged by the U.S. State Department to obviously overturn the government and go to a more democratic style. And so far, the governments of Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt had been overthrown by the Arab Spring movement, and Syria was the only one that wasn't overthrown. And as we could see with Benghazi and the human rights abuses in Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood against Coptic Christians, and even the military overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, we could tell that these efforts by the State Department already haven't been effective. And in regards to Free Syria Army, the U.S., France, Turkey, and UK had been arming them covertly as to not start an open war against Syria. But despite there being evidence that they weren't, this Free Syria Army, the main group, weren't as moderate as people would like to think, and at the time some of them were even linked to Al Qaeda groups. And then once sort of word started getting out about that Al Qaeda was being armed and supplied pretty much by the Western governments of Syria, in Syria, that's when they changed their name to ISIL, or ISIS, Islamic State. And then quickly spread to Iraq and other areas once the U.S. pulled out of Iraq. And with evidence like that, and with those established facts, pretty much arming the Free Syria Army is the same as arming ISIS. Same with the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars. It's impossible to declare war on an ideology, terrorism. It's possible to declare war on a nation, such as World War II, the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, but it's impossible to declare war on something such as fascism, which is a concept and doesn't have any clear opponents, goals, or targets. And so ever since 2001, with the invasion of Afghanistan, and then the subsequent invasion of Iraq, several $1 trillion have been spent. Thousands of American lives were lost. Tens of thousands of Iraqi civilian lives were lost, and there's no clear winner established in the conflict. Same with Afghanistan, and And I mean, as a lot of it had to do with, obviously similar to Vietnam, the military-industrial complex. The several politicians involved in the declaring war on Afghanistan and Iraq, such as Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, had large amounts of stock in defense contracting companies, such as Dick Cheney made $39.5 billion off of those both wars, which he helped start, and these complexes and contractors need to survive basically off of war and U.S. government contracts, and the same with the Bin Laden family, who despite their black sheep relative, Osama bin Laden, head of Al Qaeda, they were tasked with building a majority of military bases throughout the Middle East by the U.S. government, and as well as domestic security. After 9/11, an entire new section of government, the Department of Homeland Security, was opened up. And basically, the funding for FBI, CIA, and any department or agency related to the DHS had its funding increased, and that's where you see a lot of the NSA spying coming from, with those increased budgets. And I mean, I think that pretty much when the president says expanding the war in Syria, it's mainly expanding the pockets of those on K Street, the lobbying. You have sort of lobby groups for whether it be like military industrial complex or spyware, that such. It's really just these wars that are being declared or undeclared, as we see, aren't really to help people in the Middle East or help secure U.S. Interests or even security. It's just to make someone rich, i.e. The lobbyists in Congress and Wall Street and such. And I like to sort of see this akin to George Orwell's 1984, with one of the slogans, "War is peace." We're being sold a goods that the only way that the U.S. could be safe and we could have peace is by launching giant military operations and fighting wars that we never really belonged to in the first place. And it's pretty much a perpetual conflict. Also, another concept in the book, which has the people, the citizens of as they say, superpowers, super nations of the world, so preoccupied with building war material, and i.e. so I guess a comparison to the U.S. would be through tax money or the hyperinflation being caused by the war, and also through government contracts, and also the hysteria against terrorism, which more people every year die of bee stings than they do from terrorist attacks in the U.S., and which keeps that war hysteria keeps people against an outside source, i.e. Muslim terrorists, compared to the inside source, which is the biggest danger to the American people and their life, liberty, and property, which is the federal government. Well, thank you for listening to what I had to say.